Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Knee Deep in the Pod. I'm Dan.
And I'm Chris. And this podcast is basically a place for us to talk about games and reminisce about the good old days when we actually had time to play them. This week we're going to be picking up our conversation about game length and completionism. So let's dive right back in.
Unless we want to do any more small talk.
I have a little bit of small talk.
Oh yeah?
You want to do a little bit of small talk?
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay, so here's a game I've been playing.
We don't want to just go in dry.
You know, I've never been thanked for that.
Wait.
This is taking a weird turn.
But first, do you want to just say something like a segue?
But first, here's a couple of minutes of us talking about going in dry. I really thought you were... So anyway, but first, I would like to start us off with something I've been playing lately that might be a little bit controversial.
Oh, it's not one of those hentai games, is it?
You caught me. How did you know?
Well, you were just readily owning up to it.
You saw it in my Steam library. Most played games.
Chris is now playing Tentacle Smasher Triple X HD 2.
I'm not sure we can keep any of this. Lately, I've recently been playing and completed a game of Postal 2.
You did, yes. Postal 2. For our listeners who know nothing of this game, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so for those some people may be aware of the like franchise Postal. I think Postal 1 in particular got quite a lot of heat, and I think in particular looking back at it now, it's not aged well for various reasons. Anyway, I've not played that. Play Postal 2. How would I describe it? It is the first game I think that I've ever played that technically is referred to as an immersive sim.
Oh, I've heard of this genre.
Yes. I think another famous immersive sim is a game series called Ex Machina, I think. Is that right?
Yeah.
Deus Ex? Yeah.
Deus Ex?
Sorry, Deus Ex. You're absolutely right.
I've heard it's not an immersive sim unless you can flush the toilets. Can you do that in Postal?
You can. You know what? You can't just flush the toilets. You can wee in a urinal, or any way you like. Actually, there's a lot of weeing that you can do.
There you go. Immersive as anything, just like
absolutely.
my day today.
Yeah. You know, you can put yourself out if you're on fire. You can put yourself out by weeing on yourself.
Right.
There you go. This is the sort of detail our listeners wants to know before we dive back into the main topic.
Sounds great.
So, I think again, I'm not an expert on this. I'll be honest about that. But I believe that one of the traits of an immersive sim is basically when there are situations, quests, things to achieve or do. Basically, there are usually multiple ways to achieve them.
Right.
That's one of the defining things of an immersive sim, I believe. So, there might be, let's say, a violent solution to the thing, or there might be, I don't know, you can buy your way into a place by giving someone a certain item that you found from somewhere else, or you might be able to talk someone into something, or I don't know. There might be various kind of creatives. You might be able to wee on them, and this conversation is going to descend quickly. Anyway, the idea is that there's supposed to be kind of different creative ways of solutions to problems.
Gotcha.
That's kind of the idea. But in other senses, it's kind of not a million miles away from kind of, because it's quite open worldy. I think Deus Ex is kind of a bit open worldy as well. So there's if you've played Morrowind or Oblivion or that sort of kind of RPG where it's quite open worldy, then there's elements of that in there thrown in for sure. But there are also elements of like first person shooter because there are all sorts of weapons in the game, but a lot of them are guns. So yeah, it's this kind of real like to my experience of games, it was a real mixed bag, and it took me a while to kind of work out what am I playing? What kind of game is this?
Yeah.
So all of that said, you might think of it, if you didn't know what an immersive sim was, you might think of it as kind of an open worldy quest based game, except with the kind of defining limitations of you play 5 days, you play Monday to Friday, which in itself I kind of quite like. It kind of nicely kind of segments the game, and each day there are different tasks to achieve, and yeah, it all sort of goes from there. You have this map, and it's got markers on different things associated with the tasks you're doing. Off you go. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't say the game certainly it has a certain point of view, a certain sense of humor, and it is not to everybody's taste. But if you're going with the right mind, open mind, then you might find you enjoyed it. And most of the time, I found myself enjoying it and returning to it. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting, controversial choice.
Okay.
It's not a game. I wonder. This is actually a question for you. I wonder if you might have a game that you would say this about. It's a game which I enjoyed playing for the most part, and I kept coming back to it. However, I don't think it's a game that I would recommend for someone else to play.
I'm sure I would say that about many a game. Probably I would say that about Kingdom Hearts. Like,
Okay.
yeah, I'm kind of enjoying it and I want to finish it, but I absolutely would not recommend it.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably a whole bunch, to be honest. I have quite niche tastes, so I'm quite careful with my recommendations.
I've got one other question for you before we dive into the topic proper.
Okay, I was going to tell you about my gaming news as well, but
Oh,
you can ask your question. I'll permit.
You'll allow
I'll
it.
permit this.
so I think you are a little bit more critical or willing, basically, to put a game down if it's not doing it for you. Whereas I'm very easily pleased, and I'm of the disposition that I allow myself to be kind of pleased and enjoy a game, even if there are cracks showing all over the place. Can you give me an example of a game that you've put down recently because it just wasn't floating your boat? Or could you give me like a clear reason? Like, what is something that a game does or would do that would cause you to just put it down and be like, no?
That is a tough question. I'm looking at my library now, trying to find one. There are certainly games that I've put down. I think the reason's often a bit nebulous. Sometimes a game's just not grabbing me. There could be various reasons for that. It really varies game to game. But if I'm not having fun, I'm probably not going to keep playing it.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example, actually. Recently, I got a game called Grapple Dog. I don't know if you got me this. It'd be a bit embarrassing if you did.
I don't think that was from me.
Because it was on my wish list, and I thought it looked like a cool game. But I've just been kind of struggling a bit with it. Not finding it super fun. Just finding the physics a little finicky. I don't know, just something about it feels a bit frustrating to play. I might finish it at some point, but I've kind of put it aside for now. Which is a shame. I don't like doing that.
It's a weird sense, isn't it? Because sometimes you kind of really want to like a game.
Yeah, you want... Exactly right.
And there's something about it that like makes, there's enough about to it that you're like, oh, I kind of really I feel like I should like this. I want to like this. But as you say, it's just not quite doing it for you.
Rain World is another example. I really want to like that game, but it's a slog, and I've had to put it down again for now.
Okay, so hit us with your gaming news, Dan.
I have been playing a game called pt.2.
Man, you always come out with great stuff. I was just like, games I've never heard of every time.
So
tell me about it.
It's, I believe the term that's being used for these kinds of games is Metroidvania. Have you come across that term before?
Enlighten me.
So a Metroidvania is kind of like a Metroidvania, but the only barrier to your progress is your own knowledge. So there might be, perceived barriers to certain areas of the game, but actually it's just because you don't know yet how to get past that barrier.
Got you.
So go on.
So for listeners not familiar with the Metroidvania style of game, what's really common, right, is that there are areas you find along the way that you can't access, which you might just be a ledge you can't reach or whatever it is. And later in the game, you learn a skill, or you unlock things that then mean you can access those areas you couldn't before. You can go back and access them when you couldn't before.
Exactly.
And what you're saying now is that there's no necessarily any skill limitations that prevent you from getting to those places. It's just knowledge and things you learn.
Exactly right. Yeah. So examples of this might be Outer Wilds. I suppose The Witness is another example. There are others. Like I watched a video about Metroidvanias. Tunic might be another example. And this term I think has fairly recently been coined, and I really like it because it accurately describes a genre that previously didn't really have a name. And I really like this kind of game. And Toki-Tori 2 was another one that came up in this list, so I thought I'd give it a go. Having played Toki-Tori 1, which is actually quite different. Toki-Tori 1 is much more episodic. It's got like small self-contained levels, whereas Toki-Tori 2 is more of a sort of open world. And mechanically it's very simple. You just have two abilities. You can stomp and you can tweet, because you play as like a little bird.
Okay.
And generally like stomping will make things run away from you, and tweeting will make things come towards you. So it's very simple, but it uses those two mechanics in a lot of very clever ways to create some very interesting puzzles. So that's what I've been enjoying lately.
Nice. All right, well, with that, back to the main topic of the day. I've got a question that's quite, just to widen this topic out a bit more, or to dig a bit deeper. Have our expectations of game length changed over time? So what I mean by that is, do we have different expectations of game length for, more current, newer games than we did for, have those expectations changed compared to what we had for older games? I'm going to pick up on something straight away.
Go for it.
I know I asked the question.
I could see you like frothing at the mouth wanting to answer this. Go ahead.
Let me answer. It's mine. So, I was talking with a friend the other day, because I think of, we were talking about AAA games, and you might expect a AAA game that you spend £50 or £60 on, for example, to be 30, 40, 50 hours, like quite a long time. Or at least I might expect that. Maybe not everyone would, and it does vary as we've kind of discussed. But you'd expect like a game that you've like a AAA game, and you've spent a load of money for it to be like a long game. And he sort of mentioned that, like, well, Donkey Kong, for example, at the time, that's a AAA, that was a AAA game of the time. That was, big game. Mario, big titles.
Yeah.
If you're really proficient at those games, you can play through them in a matter of 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
It doesn't take you that long, because like each level is actually quite short.
Yeah.
And but I think the key there is proficiency. If you are skilled at the game, then actually it's they're not that long. However, I've dumped like hours and hours into those games because you're not that good when you first start playing, are you? You're learning the game. You get got by all the traps and all the the enemies, and you're not very good, or even you're starting to get good, but anyway, the game is a challenge.
Yeah.
And rightly so, and it takes you a long time to complete. But if you were just to rush it, it's not that long. But I don't think of those games as being like, if I was shortchanged, or that they feel short now. I mean, the same is true of, it wouldn't be a Knee Deep in the Pod episode if we didn't mention Doom quite a few times. So, Doom, each time you finish a level, there's like a par time, like almost like you would have with golf. Like it's a par, all of which are absurd, by the way. Like par in, like for golf is like, this is what kind of you would expect on average. Par in Doom is like, if you're super fast, like you might just get this time.
You might scrape it.
Yeah, like I've never achieved par without basically trying to like do a speed run. But anyway, each of those times each of those par times are short. They're some of them are 30 seconds. Some of them are like a couple minutes. But they're never more than a few minutes.
Yeah.
Even a big level, it'd be a few minutes. So again, you could argue that a game like Doom is a short, has the potential to be quite a short game. But again, I've dumped many hours into that game, and it does not take me a short amount of time to progress and complete the game. So, and maybe this has some sort of linkage to difficulty. I'm thinking out loud now, because, I guess both of those examples I've cited, they're all quite challenging games. It's quite skill-based games where, you need to learn to play it quite well to progress and to make your way through the game, and that takes time. And we talked about difficulty and how, whilst it's not true with all new games, there's certainly been a trend that games are perhaps easier and to attract a wider audience and attract casual gamers and all that stuff. So perhaps you don't spend as much time like replaying levels and working against skill barriers, and instead you're working through content because it's not as hard, and so you make your way through content, and so perhaps you then needs to be more content to fill the time, whereas before there might have been a much smaller amount of content, but it would have taken you longer to actually get through it.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, to be honest.
So I just went off on one, but
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, it's not true of all games, but I think certainly a lot of older games that were more difficult were a lot shorter. I'm thinking as well of like the Lion King game.
Yeah.
There were only, I don't know, 10 levels or something. Not a lot, but it was just really hard. So you probably are going to spend a lot more time on each level because you're going to die a lot.
Yeah.
But then you've got games like Knights and Merchants, which is an old game, but it's super long. But it's like you say, it was designed to have a very slow pace. It was designed to be long.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, again, that's interesting because we're sort of veering into the side topic of kind of content a game's content as opposed to necessarily games like as distinct from a game's length. Because, Knights and Merchants, the original campaign has 20 levels, which actually, I suppose, if a real-time strategy game has 20 levels, even if it's faster paced than Knights and Merchants, you might say that's actually quite a reasonable amount, but I don't know. It's, they've made 20 levels, there's a bit of scripting in some of them, but essentially, you build a town, you make some dudes, you have a fight 20 times over. So you could argue that the effort required to occupy, let's say, 40 hours of someone's time, it's quite easy in that context, like minimal, and like comparatively to, let's say, a first-person shooter, to create 40 hours of content for a first-person shooter would require much more effort than the Knights and Merchants game of just like have 20 maps, off you go, So, whereas it would be much more involved for other game types. So, just an interesting observation, I thought.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That like some games are going to be much cheaper to make content for. I would argue that Knights and Merchants, there's probably a lot of like testing that's required to ensure that the maps are like well balanced. But even so, you're not having to make new assets for each level. It's just the map itself. Whereas like a first-person shooter, you probably have to make like new assets for each area. And if you're getting through the areas very quickly, you got to make a lot of different levels,
Yeah. If you don't mind, I want to talk for a brief moment about Super Metroid 2. I think it's Super Metroid 2. It's the one that's on the mini SNES that I have played, and was really the first Metroidvania that I had ever played. And it came to mind because when you started talking about the Final Fantasy, actually, because there are certain places. What were the places that you went to get the save game?
Moogles.
A Moogle. So,
do you know what a Moogle is, by the way?
I don't know what a Moogle is. Enlighten me.
Okay, interesting. Well, I suppose you've never played a Final Fantasy game.
No.
They're these little cute creatures that have a pom-pom on their head.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fun. So in Super Metroid, there's there aren't any Moogles, but there are locations in the sprawling map that you can go to make a save. Okay. Now, I would use them occasionally, but really I would never actually, like, whilst I might save my game in the game, users of emulators will know, as you mentioned earlier, you can just save state and you can load that up, and that's kind of almost a separate process from like the in-game save. And I would use that a lot. I would use that. I mean, to be honest, I might use that before a difficult section. But also,
save
I would use
scumming is what they call that.
Is that it? Guilty as charged. But I would also use it just so I could make the sessions work for me. Again, because father of two, it's not always easy for me to you would have to travel quite a long way possibly to get to a save point, and that's not always convenient to do. So being able to just pop, save state, great, off I go, transformed my ability to play that game.
Yeah.
And I wonder how mindful game developers are of that as a kind of point of view when designing their games, in terms of how easy are we making it for players to just pick up and put down our game, and what effects that might have on engagement, because there are downsides. You could argue that having the save state function and similarly being able to save whenever you want, you could argue that in some ways can trivialize elements of the game. You could save halfway through a boss fight, where really you want someone to be able to defeat the boss all in one go, without having to kind of rely a crutch of a save point, for example. I mean, they got there once, but you know, if the purpose of a boss is kind of to test if a player has achieved a level of skill and learn, you know, and can do that reliably, you could argue that, you know, making a save point halfway through is kind of cheesing the whole affair.
You certainly could. And if I was to play devil's advocate for a second,
please,
I might ask the question, to what extent should the developers be able to tell me how to enjoy their game?
You know? Here we go.
Which is a whole another conversation.
Yeah, I can feel an episode coming on. That's really interesting. I would have a lot to say about that. Or just, yeah, having watched a lot about, you know, particularly Doom Eternal, for example, the devs have a load to say about kind of what should be fun about their game and how's the best ways to play it and all that stuff. And they're very clear in their heads about what that should be.
Maybe we should come back to that another time.
Yeah,
because that could be a whole massive tangent.
So carrying on the topic of Metroidvanias then, and coming back to Hollow Knight.
Right.
I think this is quite nice because it brings in that completionist thing again. I really like Hollow Knight. I really liked it, even though I had to ask a friend to help me. I really liked getting to the end. I think in some regards, it's a very badly designed game.
Whoa. Proceed with caution, sir.
Spicy topic ahead.
Tread carefully.
Let me tell you why, and I think you might agree.
Okay, hit me.
I'm going to wager that you're going to agree. So, I have completed Hollow Knight. However, the vast majority of storyline and lore that really makes the game make sense happens essentially after the end, or it happens kind of around the end. So it's hard to explain to someone that's not played, to our listeners that maybe have not played, but there's kind of a direct path to finishing the game. And there's this point where, like, okay, you've beaten the last boss, but you can kind of reload your game even though you've completed it, and it will load it just before you beat the last boss, so you can kind of continue to go explore and do the things you didn't do. So you can kind of take one step back and go onto all those tangential roads that you never explored, that kind of thing. And there's a whole bunch, like, I didn't really understand what was going on with Hollow Knight. Like, I don't think the story is particularly clear as you go along. You get like little snippets and interesting things here and there, and you kind of you start to build a picture of like, oh, this feels like a really interesting world, and like there's a lot going on. But no one's really explained it to me. I don't really know what's going. I don't really know what it is.
Yeah. I
just know it's kind of interesting, and like really like what's actually going on in terms of a story, you can only get to near the very end. It's challenging and hard work and long to like do those extra kind of side questy bits and, you know, find those new areas. Almost prohibitively so, and it's not, and the game doesn't particularly lead you, I don't think, to those places either. So it's only the players that are like really dedicated to kind of explore and push the boundaries, and maybe tap into, let's say, the online community to help them as a group, perhaps. So it's just like there's all this gold in your game that's like great. There's a whole bunch of content I have not played in that game, and yet I really have very little drive to experience it either. And I think that's really down to the design of the game, that it hasn't gone to the effort, or it's not, maybe that's not a fair statement, but like it's not done a good job of leading me to go do those extra bits. And it's like, why have you built all this all this content, this gold, and you're not guiding players to play it? So many players won't experience it. And it got to that point, almost like with my Crash example earlier. The amount of time and effort required to do that stuff is now I'm not willing to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And partly that is because of the Skyrim example of I've got to the end now, and so my motivation has dissipated. And so I go to the YouTube videos that summarize the lore and tell me what the bits I missed out on and fill in some of the blanks of the story, because I'm checked out now. I'm done. So, do you agree? What do you think?
Oof. It's not going to be a yes/no answer, but I empathize. I'm in a similar boat myself. I did the main story. I did a bunch of extra stuff. I did a bunch of optional bosses, but I didn't do everything. And it's like you say, partly I lost interest because I'd already beaten the game, and partly it was just there was no direction. It wasn't clear what I was supposed to do, where I was supposed to go, and it was crazy difficult.
Yeah.
Compare that to something like Spyro, which is, the other example we've talked about where we both did feel compelled to complete it. In Spyro, there's this big door, at the entrance of Dragon Shores. And even after you go into Dragon Shores, there's like another door, which you can only unlock by collecting everything. So it's very obvious what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
You get all the orbs and all the gems, and then you find out what's on the other side of the door. It's like, it's very clear to the player. With Hollow Knight, like, if I loaded it up right now, I wouldn't even know what I had left to do, because everything is so tucked away. And I think that I wouldn't necessarily say that that's bad design. I think it's a design choice. I think they've deliberately hidden stuff away to sort of reward the super fans. But I definitely do take your point that it, in a way, kind of punishes casual players who will never get to experience that stuff. And I'm not even a casual player. Like, I was really into that game. But even I wasn't willing to go the extra mile to unlock everything,
I would like to think I was a similar level of player as you in terms of commitment, because like you, I did several additional bosses and went to some areas that are not even required, for the main game, or to complete the game, like whole areas. I don't think I am opposed at all to, like, I don't mind that you are rewarded as a player for, like, being particularly inquisitive or, kind of working hard and doing those extra bits. I think probably what my objection comes down to is the fact that, like, main storyline, the storyline that really explains the whole shebang, like the whole sequence of events that you've gone through as a player, that is locked behind particularly difficult to find and reach content. Like, why would you hide main storyline behind that? Like, put some extra flair, extra, like, side content, extra, or maybe a bit of extra, fluff on top, for that stuff. Don't hide, like, key plot points, key reasoning behind the whole thing, what you've just been doing for the last 40 hours. That felt, dare I say, it felt like a dropped ball. I may even go as far as to say disrespectful of the player's time.
So you felt that because the main story was not revealed to you even after completing the game, you felt a bit sort of cheated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I felt bummed out, man. I was like, what has just happened? I still don't understand. I was expecting to, like, finally understand at the end of the game, and I don't.
Yeah.
That feels like a failing to me. But yeah, bring it on, Hollow Knight community. Like, show me what you got. Sling your things over this way.
I think I just kind of gave up on the story of Hollow Knight.
Yeah.
I loved the gameplay, but the story was, like, cryptic start to finish, and I just accepted that. I wish I
Yeah.
could have understood it, because I think there's probably a lot of like really juicy lore packed away, like tucked away somewhere, but I just gave up on it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Which is a
and
shame.
it is a shame, and that's kind of the that's pretty much the position I found myself taking in the end. Was just like, it's just like, enjoy it for the kind of picture it's painting, but really there's no kind of firm story I can like latch onto. And it was only through, watching videos of people that had done the work, that meant I could actually know what the story was about. Let me ask you something, Dan, that might end up being a spicy topic. We'll see.
Okay.
What do you think about achievements or trophies in games? Do you feel like they've been a good development? Do you feel like they add to a game?
That's an interesting question. I think we've talked about this a little bit not off camera, off mic.
Yeah.
Personally, I like achievements, and I don't mind not getting all the achievements. I feel like achievements should be rewarded for... They should be achievements, You've done something, you've gone above and beyond, and therefore you get an achievement. But I know some people resent achievements that are too difficult because they want to get all the achievements. I don't mind if there's an achievement that's like that only a handful of players can get, because I don't feel like my expectation isn't that I should always be able to get every achievement. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. And what do you think having achievements adds to the experience of a game? What do you get out of achievements?
I think it's just satisfying, isn't it, when that little thing pops up in the corner? You feel like I've achieved something. Also, from like a developer point of view, or I guess more broadly, like speaking about the industry, I think achievements are a good thing for the industry, because if you pirate a game, you're not going to get achievements. So they're adding value to the platform, like Steam, for example.
Yeah.
Steam is more valuable as a platform because it supports achievements, and people value achievements. So people are more likely to buy a game on Steam so that they can track their achievements. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, there's some good points. And you feel like, yeah, a sense of achievement, maybe a sense of pride or something. That's like, oh yeah, I got that achievement. That's
It's like, it feels good to get an achievement, but I probably won't go out of my way to get them.
Yeah. So one thing I like about achievements, I like that there's almost like a meta, or there's kind of like there's like an in-game thing. There's like stuff that you would only really appreciate. Only people that play the game would appreciate, So like, whether that's like, I don't know, make up an achievement. Like if it was a Mario game, perhaps one could be like, stamp out 5 Goombas in a row without hitting the floor. I don't know. That feels like it could be a thing.
Yeah.
And like outside the context of that game, like no, it really bears no relevance. It's like no one knows or cares what that is. But like to people that care about the game, one of which is you care about the game deeply when you're playing it. If you're enjoying it, it plays some small part of like you might be playing. Your friend might be playing the game, and you talk about it, and you're like, oh, like check out what I can do, or like this thing that I did the other day, or there's like almost a bit of that kind of sense
because you can show it off. You mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even need to show it to someone else. It almost has like I've found as I've grown older that fewer of the games that I play are ones that are necessarily shared experiences with my friendship group. I'm sure there are several reasons for that, but let's just leave it at that. That's the case, and so you might not be able to have those conversations with with a friend. Yeah, you might be the only person in your life that really knows and gets this game, and so I feel like achievements kind of play some of that role of like validating some of knowing the game well, or being able to play the game well, or, you know, finding the secret bits in the game. It kind of validates that and rewards that, you know, in ways that you might otherwise have had from speaking to, you know, sharing an experience with a friend or something. That's not to, you know, not to take away from sharing experience with a friend, but it's nice that it plays that kind of role, and it validates, being able to do cool stuff in the game. So I like that. To the conversation on game length and kind of replayability, which is, I think we've discovered in this episode, are kind of linked, that inherently linked to some degree. They, you know, for some people it will give a sense of replayability and therefore kind of game length to a degree, because you want to achieve the achievements, you want to go back and do the thing, or you want to, you know, so it might add some, you know, some hours to how long you're playing the game or willing to play the game. So, you know, that might be quite a good thing. I think I struggle when there are like 120 achievements.
Yeah.
You know, it's overwhelming. It's too much. And it does feel, I think when there is like it's out of whatever it is, there's an element that makes me feel like it's, you know, I never aim to get them all. I never particularly go out of my way to try and get them all. But also, if I've only got like a few and there are loads out there, then it's like a bit of a deflation. Because it's like, oh, I've been playing this game for 30 hours and I've only got 2 achievements.
Yeah. Like,
what does that mean? I'm a bad player? Does that mean, like, what does that mean? I don't know, but it doesn't feel good. I quite, in some ways, I mean, I quite like some examples where I think Quake, or, you know, is it Quake or is it Dusk? One of these games in my library has like 14 achievements. That's it. Which feels really like you can get your head around 14 achievements.
Yeah, it's doable, depending on the achievements.
I mean, they might even be, you know, some of those achievements might be too hard to achieve, you know, for some players, or, you know, they might take too long. You can't be bothered. But at least you get your head around it, you know?
Yeah.
If you get to 10 and you're like, those 4, they're really hard, I'm not going to bother. But when there's like 120, it's like, I don't even know where to start. Should I be reading a list? Should I be aiming for some of these? Or should I just let them roll in as I play and I just happen upon some of them? Like, it becomes like this side project. Like, should I, almost like a job. I don't really want that.
That's
like
an interesting point.
Doom Eternal has a bunch of achievements. And again, like with that game, and I've been playing it long enough, I suppose that's part of the reason, is like I have like picked up quite a few of them. But there's still loads which I haven't even got close to. And there are mostly, I mean, you get the achievements, and also like, you know, a lot of them will unlock some sort of cosmetic, or, you know, there'll be some sort of like little reward that you get because you did the achievement. And you might see like, maybe you see like a preview of cosmetic that you might get because of it, and then you're like, oh, I kind of want to do that, but oh, it's hard, and like, oh, I don't want to have to go through that whole level. That's like an hour to go and try and do that again. I don't know. I think it just starts to, when there's too many and there's too much, it almost starts to feel like work. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how else to phrase that, but I think you get my meaning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that you mentioned Doom Eternal. As I understand it, has like a reward system in-game for getting achievements.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I didn't know that, but I was thinking about games like Spyro and Ratchet and Clank, which were released before the days of achievements.
Yeah.
And they had kind of a similar feature in the form of skill points. You know, by doing certain things, you'd unlock skill points, but those skill points could then unlock in-game rewards. So in Spyro, you could unlock like an epilogue where you get to see bonus scenes of all the characters.
Oh, wow.
And in Ratchet and Clank, you could spend your skill points to unlock cheats, like get new skins or big head mode and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which was really fun, and it meant that there was a reward for getting those skill points. Whereas when it's just an achievement that shows up on your Steam profile, I don't know, maybe some people really care about that, but for me it's like it's not enough of an incentive usually to make me actually go and seek those out.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like, you know, whilst I am, you know, to some degree, like, you know, dissing on the just how many there are in Doom Eternal, it is a good example actually of one that has inspired me at least to engage with it a bit, and that's probably, I think, almost certainly because of the in-game rewards. That there is some actually there's something at least semi-meaningful within the game related to these achievements. Whereas, yeah, when it's just like a little like ding, and you can see it on someone's Steam page, like I don't care.
Is there an achievement that you're particularly proud of? Or, kind of broadening the discussion out, going back to game length and completionism, is there a game that you're particularly proud of having completed?
Ooh. I mean, so the Elder Scrolls games that I have completed, Oblivion and Skyrim, I don't know if I'm like proud that I've completed them. I'm very pleased that I have. I'm pleased that I've experienced it, and I feel like because of that, there is an authority or like a common experience, a shared experience that I then have with other players. That I can share with them, even if they haven't completed it. I feel like I will have experienced whatever they've experienced, basically. And there's a commonality there, which I like. In terms of like completing, I mean, I'm kind of proud of Doom Eternal. I'm actually more proud, I suppose, of like classic Doom or some of the like classic FPSs. I'm actually really proud of Knights and Merchants, dare I say, particularly because of how hard we found that when we were kids. But that's an interesting question. I might slightly cheat as I ask you the same question to see if there's any inspiration from my library.
Let me consult my list of completed games. Yeah, I mean, Knights and Merchants, Anno 1602, done like all the campaigns for that.
Yeah.
The Witness.
Ooh.
Very proud of having completed that, because that's quite a hard game. There's some hard puzzles in there. And me, and with a bit of help from my brother towards the end, we just 100%ed that game, which is super hard to do, I think. I don't know if I could have done it without him helping me.
You know, it's an interesting question, really. I think maybe I'm just I don't know if proud is quite the right word. I think perhaps I would more readily use or identify with like satisfied, perhaps, rather than like proud necessarily. And I think, there are several games that kind of that eluded completion for me for some time, and I'm quite satisfied that I have completed it now. Shovel Knight, I think is one of those games. That is actually quite a challenging game, actually. So maybe I am a bit proud of that one. I think games where I've returned to and completed them after many years, I'm very satisfied that I completed them. So so I did actually complete Sheepdog and Wolf after 15 years of it being like on the list somewhere. Would
you say you're more relieved than anything?
There is some relief. There was an element, because I think, for me, there is an element of like, and I'm the same with books, and I sometimes I kind of actively work against this instinct, but I do sort of have an instinct of like, once I've started a thing, like a book or a game or some sort of like, some sort of piece of media that takes time to get through, I feel some level of compulsion that I kind of can only sort of have. I want to finish it, and I kind of feel like I can only have one or two on the go. Like I don't feel like I can have like loads on the go. I'd much prefer to kind of focus on one or two. That can be a real boon and really excellent, because when I'm really like focused on one or two things that are really, really great, and I just keep wanting to come back to them, I do, and I'm loving life. Other times, I'm in a game that I don't particularly love. Yeah. I'm not loving it. It's a bit of a grind, but I don't feel like I want to leave it and move on to something else. And so I sometimes get a bit stuck in that way. And yes, it can feel like a relief when you complete that game, because it's like, okay, I've done it, I can move on. I did sort of enjoy it, but also there were some challenges, and it was a bit grindy at times.
Do you know the game Space Cam?
I know of the game Space Game. I think I've watched you play it once.
I was really into that game for a while. It's one of my more played games in my library. And I got to the very last level, like the final boss. And I just couldn't beat it. And it's one of those games where, like, it takes a long time to beat every level. Like, I could... Tomorrow night, I could pick up that game. I could spend the whole evening on that final level and still not beat it.
Yeah.
You know, I could set aside a Saturday. I could spend a whole Saturday on that final level and still not beat it.
Wow.
And at that point, it's like... It's really frustrating because it feels like I have this unfinished business. I want to finish that game.
Yeah.
But I'm not willing to set aside like a whole big chunk of time to try and complete this level, knowing that there's a good chance I will just fail.
Yeah.
And then that time's wasted. It's like what we were saying about segments of progress, you know. I feel like the segment of progress that's remaining has like an indeterminate amount of time required to complete it.
Yeah. That's interesting. It puts me in mind, it just reminds me of it's a speedrunning thing, really. Or I don't know if it's even speedrun. It kind of is, but it's also like an endurance thing. And like you sometimes see these challenges where like there might be a game, a series of games, you know, maybe there's like, you know, 1, 2 and 3, you know, or whatever. And people will give themselves the challenge to like play through all of them without dying, for example.
Oh yeah. It's
And
brutal.
to do that for really brutal. And like to do that from, you know, game 1 to game 3, you know, just playing those games, you know, let's say it takes you 8 hours, 12 hours, you know, it's a long stint. And then, you know, if you're 9 hours in and then you die, you've wasted, well, I don't define waste, but, you know, you've used a whole day to do that and then to fail. And there's no saved progress. You now have to start again from the beginning if you want to try and achieve that again. You know, there's a reason why there's only a few people doing that. And I get, you know, they just make it their like streaming challenge every day, I suppose, and people tune in, and maybe that's how it works.
Yeah.
It's a huge investment. And I guess this relates actually slightly to our shared, not dislike, but you know, we neither of us particularly love roguelikes. I think we you know, established in a previous episode. I think part of the reason for that for me, is just like the removal of progression.
Yeah. You feel like you die and the run's wasted, the time's wasted.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting what you were saying about the people streaming these crazy challenges, because I think we live in a time where these sorts of challenges are now possible in a way that they never would have been before. Like before streaming, who is going to realistically commit their entire life for so many weeks just to achieve this challenge that no one's going to witness?
Yeah,
just would never have happened.
No, I mean, and there are some cool things about it. I mean, the other thing that comes to mind is it games done quickly, or what's that like?
Oh yeah, games done quick.
Yeah, like it is. Yeah, games done quick. And like I've tuned into a few of those streams, and you know, like particularly, you know, there's been like people completing Donkey Kong in insanely fast times and that sort of stuff, and that's kind of fun to watch.
I love it.
But also quite skillful, isn't it? Like it actually takes quite a long time to work out. They do a lot of exploits. Is that what they're called? Like you find like exploits in the game to like skip portions of the game and all sorts of nonsense.
We could probably talk about speedrunning for another episode, but shall we maybe wrap this one up?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a good chat on game length and completionism.
Yeah, great great discussions. So cheers, Chris, and thank you to everyone listening.
Thank you, all the many thousands of people at the other end.
Yeah, and if you could just stop sending those grisly attachments to Chris's email inbox, that would be much appreciated.
In other news, t-shirts coming out soon with disembodied Dan and Chris heads. Watch the merch store.
I don't want this to become a thing.
See you later.
Bye.